Have you ever slowly talked yourself into something you once swore you would never do? Not overnight, not dramatically, just one small justification at a time. A little resentment here, a tiny disappointment there. A quiet thought you don't say out loud because even you aren't sure you want to hear it clearly. We tend to think betrayal is explosive, obvious, cinematic. Someone wakes up and decides, "Today, I become the villain." But psychologically, that's almost never how it works. The human mind is subtler than that, more gradual, more self-protective. When people talk about Judas, they usually focus on the kiss, the silver, the moment. But the real psychological story isn't in the kiss, it's in the weeks or maybe months before it. The inner dialogue, the shift in expectation, the tiny cracks forming in the relationship between belief and reality. Imagine following someone you are convinced is going to change everything. You've left stability behind. You've tied your identity to a movement. You're emotionally invested, and then things don't unfold the way you expected. That's where the mind begins to wobble. Psychologists call it cognitive dissonance. It's that uncomfortable tension between what you believe and what you're experiencing. You think, this is the Messiah, this is power, this is revolution. And then you see humility, suffering, warnings about sacrifice instead of conquest. Your brain doesn't like contradictions. It wants coherence. So it starts adjusting something. Sometimes it adjusts reality. Sometimes it adjusts the belief. Sometimes it adjusts the narrative about the person. We often imagine Judas as greedy, and maybe money played a role, but greed alone is rarely powerful enough to dismantle loyalty. What's more potent is disillusionment, the slow realization that the future you imagined might not be coming. Have you ever signed up for something you were sure would transform your life? A job, a relationship, a project. You invested your pride into it. You told people about it. You saw yourself becoming someone bigger because of it. And then the cracks started showing. The leader wasn't what you expected. The reward wasn't arriving. The timeline kept shifting. Your brain hates being wrong, especially publicly wrong. There's research showing that when people strongly commit to an identity, political, religious, professional, they don't easily abandon it when evidence contradicts it. Instead, they reinterpret the evidence. They rationalize, they double down. But sometimes, when the dissonance gets too intense, the psyche flips into something else. Distancing. What if Judas didn't wake up wanting betrayal, but woke up feeling increasingly detached? That's a different picture, isn't it? Think about how distancing works in your own life. When you're hurt by someone you once admired, you don't immediately attack them. First, you withdraw emotionally. You become analytical, slightly critical. You start noticing flaws you previously ignored. It's a protective maneuver. If the ideal collapses, you don't want to collapse with it. Your brain begins rewriting the narrative to preserve your sense of control. There's also the psychology of unmet ambition. Imagine believing you're part of a movement that will change the world. You see influence, power, recognition, and then you're told the path forward involves surrender, humility, possibly suffering. That's not the script you imagined. The human ego does not enjoy shrinking. We know from behavioral studies that people experience status threat as a form of psychological pain. The same neural pathways that light up during physical discomfort can activate when we feel diminished or sidelined. If Judas expected a kingdom and saw instead a path toward crucifixion, his internal world might have been collapsing long before any coins changed hands. And when the ego feels threatened, it looks for relief. Relief can come in the form of justification. Maybe this isn't what I thought. Maybe he's not who I thought. Maybe I need to take matters into my own hands. The story begins to bend in a direction that protects the self. There's another uncomfortable layer here. Proximity to greatness can amplify insecurity. Being close to someone who seems morally certain, emotionally grounded, and unwavering can intensify your own doubts. Social comparison theory tells us that we constantly measure ourselves against those around us. And when we fall short, especially next to someone extraordinary, the gap can feel unbearable. Instead of growing through that gap, the mind sometimes tries to close it in another way, by lowering the other person. If you can convince yourself that they're flawed, misguided, or disappointing, your ego stabilizes. This isn't ancient history. This is office politics. This is friendships. This is family dynamics. When someone rises in clarity or conviction, those nearby sometimes respond not with admiration, but with subtle resistance. Then there's the psychology of control. When situations feel uncertain, people often seek a decisive act to regain agency. It doesn't have to be wise, it just has to feel active. Research on decision-making under stress shows that uncertainty increases impulsive choices. The discomfort of not knowing can feel worse than the consequences of acting. If Judas sensed events spiraling in a direction he didn't understand, stepping in, even destructively, might have felt like reclaiming control. Notice how human that is. Not evil in a cartoonish way, not mustache-twirling villainy, but insecurity layered with unmet expectation, layered with dissonance, layered with ego threat. A mind trying to stabilize itself. And here's the haunting part. The same mechanisms live in you. You may never betray someone with a kiss in a garden, but you've likely felt the shift, that moment when admiration cools, when loyalty feels complicated, when you begin narrating someone differently to make your own discomfort easier to hold. Your brain is always protecting your identity. There's a concept in moral psychology called moral licensing. After we've done something good or committed strongly to something virtuous, we sometimes subconsciously give ourselves permission to act against it later. I've sacrificed enough. I deserve something. I've been loyal. That subtle internal credit system can tilt decisions without us realizing it. Imagine combining moral licensing with disillusionment. It's combustible. Then there's fear. Fear that you've attached yourself to something that will cost you more than you're willing to pay. Humans are remarkably sensitive to social and physical danger cues. When perceived threat rises, the amygdala activates, prioritizing survival over principle. In moments of high emotional arousal, long-term values can temporarily go quiet. You don't stop being capable of loyalty, but you become more focused on immediate relief. The mind of Judas before the betrayal might not have been cold. It might have been conflicted, restless, rationalizing, building a case. That's how most moral fractures begin, not with a roar, with a whisper. And here's where it becomes uncomfortable for us. If betrayal is gradual, then so is integrity. You don't wake up one day perfectly grounded. You practice it in small moments. You notice resentment before it hardens. You admit disappointment before it morphs into blame. You confront cognitive dissonance instead of quietly rewriting reality. Because once the narrative shifts enough, actions follow. Neuroscience tells us that repeated thoughts strengthen neural pathways. The more you rehearse a justification, the more natural it feels. Eventually, the unthinkable becomes plausible, then reasonable, then inevitable. That's terrifying, but it's also empowering, because it means the opposite is true. If the mind can drift into betrayal slowly, it can drift toward awareness slowly. You can catch yourself mid-narrative. You can pause and ask, am I protecting my ego right now, or am I protecting something real? You can admit disappointment without weaponizing it. Maybe the tragedy of Judas isn't just that he betrayed someone else. Maybe it's that he didn't interrupt his own story soon enough. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to justify when you feel misunderstood? How quickly your inner lawyer appears? That voice that says, you're not wrong. You're just correcting things. The psyche is brilliant at self-defense. It hates shame. It hates being wrong. so it builds scaffolding around fragile pride. But awareness is a different kind of strength. When you recognize the early signs, resentment, disillusionment, comparison, you're standing at the edge of a decision. Not a dramatic one, a subtle one. Do you lean into the narrative that protects your ego? Or do you sit in the discomfort and examine it? That's where growth lives. The mind of Judas before the betrayal isn't a distant relic. It's a mirror. It shows us what happens when insecurity and unmet expectation go unexamined, when control becomes more important than trust, when the ego feels cornered and starts rewriting the script. And yet, understanding these mechanisms doesn't condemn us. It humanizes us. It reminds us that our darkest choices don't usually start in darkness. They start in confusion, in fear, in wounded pride. The question isn't whether you're capable of rationalizing something harmful. You are. So am I. The real question is whether you're willing to watch your own narrative forming, whether you're brave enough to say, "This story I'm telling myself, where is it leading?" Because long before any visible betrayal, there's an invisible conversation happening inside. And that's where change is still possible. If this perspective made you rethink what betrayal actually looks like, I'd love to know what parts stood out to you. And if you're curious about the hidden psychological layers inside other ancient stories, stay with me. There's always more going on beneath the surface than we first assume.